Today we are filming a Swedish dancer baking demo. We are going to demonstrate the making of Swedish tea rings and Swedish kringler. Now, the tea rings, we like to use the hot roll mix, and I've made mini tea rings using the old-fashioned recipe, but the benefit of this is that it only has to rise for 30 minutes. So that's a large tea ring. You need 1 box of hot roll mix, 1 egg, most of a stick of butter, cinnamon, and sugar. Following the cinnamon roll recipe on the side of the hot roll mix box. So we'll start with adding the flour mixture. Then it calls for 3 tablespoons of sugar. Two tablespoons of butter. Melted butter for this part, it's easier. I should have mixed the yeast in first, but filming makes me nervous. So we'll see if this works. Typically you would have mixed the yeast and the dry ingredients all together and then added the butter, but I think it will be okay. 1 egg. And then 1 cup of water. And the water needs, the package says that the water needs to be 120 to 130 degrees. I don't want to mess it up, so you check it with a candy thermometer, but many experienced bakers just go with the flow on that and do it by not quite that particular. And I have this very unique straight stick that I use to stir it, but I think any type of wooden spoon for stirring would be fine. So you just stir until all of the dough is moistened. Then as the dough begins to leave the side of the bowl like this, then you will turn it out onto the counter and start. And we have 2 batches here. This batch is a little bit drier. You can see there's less touching the side of the bowl and everything. This one is a little bit wetter. We just had slightly different amounts of water. Both of these are going to work. So it can look either way when you get to this point. You're going to dump it out onto the counter that you've already sprinkled flour on, and you'll get some flour on your hands. And then it is when it's a little drier like this, it's a little easier to start with. But then you're going to just knead it, and you keep adding flour and spreading it onto the counter. And you knead it for about 5 minutes. So after about 5 minutes of kneading, the dough will not be as sticky as it was to begin with. It won't stick to your fingers. It won't stick to the cabinet as much, to the counter as much. So at that point, you'll shape it into a ball, and then you're going to cover it with your bowl and let it rest for 5 minutes. You will shape it into about a 15 by 10 inch rectangle. And I kind of use gravity to get started by doing it like this. And then just lay it down and stretch it out. The dough at this point, even though we don't have any flour actually on it, it's not too sticky, although it will get a little bit sticky. So we'll sprinkle just a little bit of flour on it as we roll it out. I'm kind of a precise person, so I do like to actually kind of get a measurement on it to make sure we're pretty close. And this is pretty good. Okay, at this point, you don't want melted butter, but you do want softened butter. And so I think that will be about right. So I don't measure anything at this point. I just liberally spread margarine or butter all over the rectangle. If the butter is too soft, it will kind of squirt out and be messy. But of course, if it's too hard, it'll be hard to spread. And again, with the sugar, I don't really measure it too much. I just sprinkle sugar all over the whole rectangle. It's like that was a little more than a half a cup. And then just cover with cinnamon. I like a lot of cinnamon. Okay, now this part is different than what it will say on the box. The box says to roll up from the 10-inch side, but we're going to roll up from the 15-inch side for a T-ring. When you get to the far end, you're just going to bring the other side up and kind of pinch it together. We'll try to put this seam on the bottom when we put it on the pan, and so in some ways it doesn't matter a whole lot, but if it's sticking together, that's pretty good. That's the best. If you have trouble getting the seam to seal, you can use a little bit of water. Sometimes if the butter has leaked out, you can use just a little, dip your fingers in water and kind of squeeze it, and then it will seal better. Okay, so then I use just, I don't know what size this is, maybe a 12-inch. Yeah, I use a 12-inch pizza pan. This is just an old one, obviously, that we have around the house. I find that something with a little bit of a lip is kind of nice. It will sometimes keep it from completely spreading out, but that's not that significant. You can use the aluminum disposable pans that you can purchase at a grocery store. So then you're going to pick it up and move it onto the pan, and you want to try to lay the seam side down and then just shape it into a circle. The dough is pretty forgiving at this point. You can kind of shape it into a circle like this. I don't try to seal the ends because, as you'll see in the next step, we're going to lay them over, so I don't really worry too much about the ends. But you're going to want to start at one end, and I make cuts about 3/4 of the way through the circle, about 1 inch apart all the way around. You can see all of that cinnamon and sugar starts to spill out, but it doesn't matter. So we're right back where we started. Now, one thing I can see is I could have done a better job of, it's a little bit narrower here than it is on the other side. So I could have done a little bit of job of smoothing out, of evening out my tube before I turned it, but it will be okay. So then you're just going to start with one of the cuts and kind of pull it, lay it over on its side to where it's like that. And you're just going to go around one cut at a time and shape it like that. Now here's where on the end, you can kind of see this is going to be a little bit fuller on this side of the T-ring than it is on this. So one thing we could do to offset that is we could cut this one off here where it's really tapering off and bring it around so that it's a little bit less like that. I'll do this one too. But even with that much, this will look okay when it's finished. It will be fine. So now we will cover it with, and I use a white tea towel that I get it wet in hot water, and then I will cover it, and we'll let it rest. We covered the T-ring after it was shaped with a damp tea towel, and it has rested or risen for 30 minutes. So now we will bake it in a 350-degree oven for about 20 minutes, but you do want to keep an eye on it, and in many cases you will want to turn it around in the middle so that it bakes evenly on all sides. Okay, you can also use one recipe of hot roll mix to make 4 small T-rings, and so everything is the same up until the point where you have it rolled up like this, and then at this point you're going to cut it into 4 equal portions. So cut it in half once all the way through, and then cut it in half again all the way through. And then you're going to take each of the 4 portions and cut it in 5. Cut it about 3/4 of the way through with 4 cuts for 5 different sections. So of course you want to make them as equal as possible. Then place them on a pan, and this is a little bit same idea with shaping it, only it's going to be open in the middle instead of or it's going to be closed in the middle instead of open like the full-size T-ring, but it's just kind of going to look like a little flower. So this is the finished Kringler. After it's cooled, I would make an icing of powdered sugar and a little bit of milk and almond and vanilla extract and pipe it around it. But this is what it looks when it's done baking.